The snow fell quietly all night, covering the chilly ground with a soft, downy blanket. In the morning, outside the window, there was some rustling and some fiddling. It was a flock of tits on the windowsill, eagerly awaiting their daily feed. Around November, Erin started feeding them regularly with a handful of seeds. The birds quickly became accustomed to it, and every day they would come for their share. When the birds saw their food provider through the window, they became animated. One of them tapped twice on the window with its beak as if to say, "Open up, we're here already." There were no sunflower seeds available, so the young woman used sliced bread from dinner. The tits happily accepted this simple treat and enthusiastically began to peck at it. As the woman watched their lively activity, vague memories from her distant childhood started to resurface in her mind. Once upon a time she used to prepare a simple treat for herself and her younger brother, Cooper. They would slightly wet the bread and sprinkle sugar on top. The resulting makeshift cake would crunch between their teeth, sugary but delicious. Sweets were a rarity in their house. Sometimes their mother's guests, mostly men, would spoil the children with candy or chocolates. Erin remembered a time when their apartment still retained the freshness of recent cosmetic repairs. A lacy doily adorned the dresser and a new TV stood in the corner. Her mother Helen was perfect then, with thick, shiny blonde curls cascading over her graceful shoulders. She wore a stunning white chiffon dress with blue flowers, which complemented her sparkling, cornflower blue eyes. Her boyfriends smelled of tobacco and pleasant cologne. One of them, Alan, had lived with them for a long time. He had a kind smile on his freckled face and was always cracking jokes, making him a good man in the little girl's eyes. Alan was skilled with his hands and could fix anything. There wasn't a single wobbly door or malfunctioning switch in the house. Even their old washing machine started working again, thanks to his expertise. Little Cooper was delighted by Alan's collection of tools, such as various screwdrivers and soldering irons. He would stick close to the man, admiring his craftsmanship. Alan would also not tolerate dirty dishes and made sure the children were fed on time and dressed cleanly. However, her wayward mother disliked moralizing and constantly referred to him as a bore and a tyrant. She craved lightness and a holiday every day. Disputes between them became more frequent and louder, foreshadowing the inevitable end of their relationship. One day, Alan's bag of belongings disappeared from the pantry, along with his tool case. With them, the coziness and balance of the house vanished. Erin's mother became untethered, partying excessively. Noisy gatherings would often last late into the night in their house. Sometimes the woman wouldn't even come home to sleep. On those nights, Cooper would climb under the blanket with Erin, seeking comfort. The elder sister would whisper to him long tales about the evil witches, fearless Red Riding Hood, and hard-working dwarves. During one of these troubled periods, Helen approached their neighbour, Mrs. Gordon. She gave her a spare key to the front door and requested that she occasionally look after her children. Besides, she poured out her complaints about life and the lack of money. Mrs. Gordon, a tall brunette with a perpetual perm, worked as the head of the personnel department at a factory in the city. With her help, Helen managed to secure a job as a cleaner there. Mrs. Gordon had no sympathy for her drunken neighbour, but she felt sorry for her children. Getting a stable job, unexpectedly for everyone, Helen calmed down and settled down for a while. It seemed like she had finally regained her senses, and everything would be fine in their lives. And then Mindy, the funny-eyed little girl, was born, and she immediately became everyone's favourite. Even the strict neighbour couldn't resist humming cheerfully to her whenever they encountered each other. The father of the child, like the fathers of Erin and Cooper, was unknown. The children had long stopped asking their mother about their father, as it only irritated her. And despite everything, they loved her dearly. The woman once again resembled the tender and caring mother from before, showering them with hugs and kisses, singing lullabies, and frying pancakes on weekends. But soon enough, Helen grew tired of the role of a responsible head of the family. The cycle of cavaliers and drinking buddies resumed. The new guests reeked of alcohol and had a stale, unwashed odour. Blue tattoos peeked out from under their t-shirts. At best, the children received indifferent glances. At worst, they were scolded. And the present friends of their mother never brought the children any gifts. The care of Mindy was fully transferred to the older children, with Erin bearing the majority of the burden on her fragile shoulders. Money was extremely scarce. To keep up with everything, she had to occasionally skip school, but her natural ingenuity and inquisitive mind helped her maintain good academic performance. Teenage interests took a back seat, and her few girlfriends disappeared from her life. Her mother seemed to have tried drowning herself in booze to numb her soul in an alcoholic frenzy, even if only temporarily. She completely neglected her appearance. Her unwashed hair turned grey, wrinkles lined her face, and heavy bags under her eyes were shades of blue. She increasingly became unable to work. Many times Erin substituted for her and cleaned floors to prevent her mother from getting fired. And then Helen became pregnant again and openly admitted that she decided to keep the child only for the sake of the allowance. Every day she sat on a porch with a bottle of cheap beer, sipping the foul-smelling warm liquid and staring at a single point for hours. Erin had to work hard in Helen's place more and more often. Balancing studying, working, and taking care of her younger siblings was incredibly difficult. Thankfully, Cooper took on some responsibilities, and in Erin's absence, he would prepare a simple dinner. Usually it was boiled pasta or porridge, but nevertheless, his older sister always praised the 12-year-old boy for his help. By that time, Mindy was almost 6 years old. That day, Erin returned from school and noticed an ambulance near their house. Hurriedly coming into the house, she froze in horror at the sight before her. Helen lay on a medical stretcher, her face deadly pale, covered in drops of cold sweat, and a pool of blood visible on the nearby floor. "What happened?" the girl whispered, frightened, as she knelt down beside the stretcher. "Mummy, my dear, what's wrong with you?" "Your mother is experiencing massive uterine bleeding. We need to get her to the hospital immediately," replied the paramedic. Erin quickly decided, "I'm coming with you. I won't let her go alone." The paramedic, rushing, nervously responded, "No, children are not allowed in the ambulance. It's against regulations." Erin was deeply concerned about her mother, knowing that she wasn't very young, so she was determined not to back down. "Please, I beg you, I won't interfere," she pleaded with the stern doctor, tears streaming down her cheeks. Softening upon seeing her pleading eyes, the paramedic waved his hand and said, "Okay, I don't have time to argue, let's go." And he took hold of the stretcher handles. At the hospital, the girl was given shoe covers and allowed to wait in the corridor near the operating room. There was a buzz of activity. No one paid attention to Erin. Doctors hurried into the operating room and interchanged phrases. "A 45-year-old woman. Placental abruption. Massive bleeding." After some time, a weary doctor emerged from the operating room. Erin's heart clenched with anxiety, fearfully awaiting the medical verdict. The man sympathetically placed his hand on her shoulder and said, "Stay strong, girl. We did everything we could, but it was too late. Your mother passed away." He paused for a moment, allowing her to grasp the sad news, and continued, "The child was saved. You now have a healthy brother." It felt as if something heavy and soft had struck the girl's head. Her vision darkened, and breathing became difficult. Time and space seemed to cease to exist. "Mummy, my poor mummy!" Tears streamed down Eric's cheeks like a hailstorm. A woman in a white coat snapped her out of her daze, asking, "Are you feeling unwell?" Erin took a deep breath and responded with a shaky voice, "I'm normal, thank you, but I don't know what to do next." An elderly nurse approached and said, "Next, you should give me your father's phone number." "I don't have a father," Erin whispered, feeling bewildered. "Well, do you have a grandmother or any older relatives?" The girl simply shook her head and said, "Only my younger brother and sister." A compassionate woman sat down next to her and said, "The body will have to be taken away and buried." Erin couldn't help but shudder at the word body. It was her mother, the woman who had loved her, sung lullabies to her as a child, and comforted her when she cried. The nurse felt sorry for the orphan and tried to offer some help. "Go outside, down the street into the archway and into the yard. You'll see a sign there that says Ritual Services. They'll give you all the information you need." Erin suddenly looked up at the nurse and asked, "And when can I pick up my brother?" The woman looked at her closely and asked, "How old are you?" Erin slowly replied, 17. The woman sighed and shook her head sadly. "He will go to a baby home." Erin's eyes filled with a glimmer of hope as she asked, "When I turn 18, can I take my brother then?" "I don't think so," the nurse replied. "Babies are usually adopted quickly. You better think about yourself. Maybe you will be sent to an orphanage too." This cruel but honest answer left Erin speechless. The thought of being separated from her brother and sister shattered her world, and indeed, no one will understand that they have all long been independent, and Erin is ready to work day and night only if they are not separated. "Well, we have neighbours and other options," she tried to explain, but then stopped herself. The nurse simply shrugged her shoulders and remained silent. The funeral home assured her that everything would be taken care of and presented her with a hefty bill. It made Erin's soul feel even heavier. On the way back, she couldn't stop thinking about how she would break the sad news to little Mindy and sensitive Cooper. Her thoughts were jumbled, and she didn't even notice how she arrived at her neighbour's house. The neighbour was already waiting for her. "So, how is your mum?" Erin had to say it out loud for the first time. "Mum died," she managed to squeeze out, her lower lip trembling. The woman reacted sympathetically and hugged Erin. The girl looked down, not wanting to go into details. She remembered the sad errands ahead and held out the bill in her hand. "Mrs. Gordon, could you please help me? I only have half of the amount, which I was saving for graduation. I'll pay you back later." "Of course, you can rely on me," Mrs. Gordon replied, taking the bill in a businesslike manner. As Erin stepped into the house, a joyful Mindy greeted her with open arms and shouted, "Hooray! Erin is here!" Cooper peeked out of the room, holding a textbook in his hand. "Were you at the hospital?" he asked, but froze when he saw his sister's face. "What's wrong with Mum?" Erin slowly walked into the kitchen and collapsed into a chair, exhausted. It felt as if 1,000 blankets had been thrown over her shoulders. The children followed her. Mindy stared at her sister with her big cornflower eyes, unable to understand why her kind Erin looked so upset. Cooper watched anxiously. "Where is Mum?" Mindy asked casually. Erin covered her eyes for a moment and let out a heavy sigh. "Mindy, Mummy is gone." Her tired voice sounded muffled. Cooper, who had matured early, held his breath with a stoic expression. He understood everything perfectly. "What do you mean, gone?" the little girl asked in surprise. "When will she return?" Mindy asked, her voice filled with confusion. "She flew away to the sky," Erin replied, remembering a scene from a movie where the death of a parent was explained to a young heroine. "To the moon? Will she come back?" Mindy bombarded her with questions. "She won't come back, but she'll watch over us from above all the time, and we'll live together amicably." The childlike innocence in Mindy's words helped Erin gather herself. The responsibility for their future now rested solely on her shoulders. She tried to embrace both children, but Cooper pulled away and ran off. Erin knew it was better not to touch him at that moment and let him be alone with his thoughts. A little later she entered his bedroom. The boy lay on the bed trying to hide his tear-stained face from his sister. Erin lay down next to him and hugged him, just like she used to do when she told him bedtime stories. "It's terrible, and it's painful, Cooper, but I have you and Mindy. We're a family. We'll get through this shadow time together, won't we?" she whispered to her brother. Meanwhile, the younger sister came into the room too and declared, "Why are you both hiding from me?" She climbed up and settled down between them. Cooper didn't mind, so they lay there, huddled together until nightfall. Erin told them old fairy tales, while the night light cast whimsical shadows on the walls and ceiling. It felt as if the three of them had entered an unknown world where daunting challenges awaited them, but together they would overcome any obstacles in their path. The next day, Mrs. Gordon made a quick trip to the funeral home, and the bill for the services was cut almost in half. Erin didn't mind. All she wanted was for the farewell to go as it should. A day later, everything was ready. The funeral was simple. None of the drinking buddies or suitors showed up, perhaps because they were unaware. Only a few neighbours, Cooper and Erin, attended. It was decided not to take Mindy. The kind-hearted neighbours felt genuine sympathy for the orphaned children, even though the deceased was not pitied in her lifetime. They collected a small amount of money, enough to cover the remaining cost of the funeral services. Helen looked better in death than she had in life. Erin hadn't seen such a calm and peaceful expression on her face in a long time. It felt as if she would open her eyes at any moment and be amazed to find herself lying in a coffin. This absurd thought persisted in Erin's mind, making it difficult for her to control her emotions. Tears streamed down her face as she made her way to the cemetery. It only became a little easier when the coffin was put down on the bottom of the grave and the men with shovels started filling in with earth. The few people who had seen Helen off dispersed. The children embraced each other and silently mourned at their mother's grave. Their relationship with each other improved even more than before. Each knew their responsibilities. Every day, Cooper took his younger sister to kindergarten on his way to school and picked her up on his way back. He also helped around the house and did his homework in the evenings. Erin attended her classes, and in the afternoons she rushed to clean the factory. Thanks to Mrs. Gordon's patronage, she was able to get the job. Even Mindy stopped being cranky in the morning and started helping around the house. However, the thought of her newborn brother never left Erin's mind. "Where are you? What happened to you? Soon I'll be 18 and I'll try to find out where you are and how to get you back. Just wait for me. I'll find you," the girl longingly thought every night before going to bed. One evening, after finishing her cleaning duties, Erin returned home and found two unfamiliar women in their apartment. A short-haired brunette, wearing a dark suit and thick glasses, was sitting at a desk writing something. The other woman, a blonde in a mustard-coloured jacket over a black knit dress, stood in front of Mindy and Cooper. They were sitting on the sofa, looking like frightened animals. Evidently, the woman had just intimidated them. "Ah, there's Erin. We've been waiting for you," exclaimed the blonde guest. The warmth in her voice contradicted her cold official appearance. "My name is Mrs. Parker, and this is Mrs. Blake," the woman at the desk said, peering at the girl over her glasses. "We represent the Child Protection Service." Erin already understood what was happening, but a glimmer of hope for a positive outcome remained in her heart. Mrs. Parker continued, "We have received information about 3 underage children living here without supervision." "I'll be 18 in a few months," Erin hurried to clarify. "Honey, legally you are still a child for a few more months. Your family has experienced a tragedy, and the state is taking custody of you. We are here to help," the official explained, affectionate yet firm. "Pack your things, yours and the younger children's," she instructed. "But we are managing just fine. We're clean and have everything we need," Erin tried to prove their worth. The social worker shook her head condescendingly. Her gaze froze everything around her, and her tone didn't allow for objections. "Gather your things. There's nothing to discuss." "You can't just remove us like this, tonight." The older sister's nerves started to fray in despair and helplessness. "Not only can we do it, but we have to," the woman calmly assured her. "Please don't make us call for help or use force. It will only scare the younger children." With tears streaming down her face, Erin gathered their essential belongings, and the 3 orphans set off into the unknown. For a few days they stayed in one place with around 10 other children. The caregivers assigned them to a separate room, provided them with good meals, and left them undisturbed. Cooper and Mindy never left Erin's side. They were focused, yet calm. Erin had already accepted this situation and decided that they could wait for her adulthood in these conditions, as long as they were not separated. However, it turned out that they were waiting for distribution. 3 days later, a car with social workers arrived to pick up Mindy and Cooper, while Erin had to go to another orphanage. Her heart was torn by the crying of her little sister. Erin kissed her goodbye and vowed through tears that she would find them soon and take them away. Cooper silently experienced the parting, only uttering, "We will be waiting for you," as he got into the car. One piece of Erin's soul was taken away in an unknown direction, along with her brother and sister, and coldness settled inside. In the new place, Erin sat on the bed in the girls' bedroom for several days, feeling devastated and indifferent to her surroundings. The other girls showed little interest in the new arrival. In the orphanage, they had their own rules and little sympathy for each other. Some girls of the same age would mistreat and steal from the younger ones. Witnessing such incidents, Erin imagined that it could be her brother and sister, and one time she couldn't bear it and stood up for the mistreated child. From now on, she became the victim too. They would spoil her food in the dining room, stain her clothes, and complain to her teachers. Erin realized that her life would not improve, and complaining to the teachers would only make things worse. Finally, she dared to run away. It happened spontaneously. She simply walked out, wearing whatever she had on, through the gate that someone had forgotten to close. In her pocket, she only had an old button phone that belonged to her dead mother and a small amount of money she had saved up before ending up in the orphanage. To her great luck, a bus was pulling up to the bus stop 50 meters from the orphanage. The decision came suddenly. It felt like an eternity as she travelled somewhere far away without a plan. The jubilation of unexpected liberation was soon replaced by uncertainty about the correctness of her actions. As small, pretty houses with colourful roofs, surrounded by greenery, replaced the aesthetic high-rise buildings, the bus suddenly stopped at one of the stops, and the driver loudly announced, "The end stop." The bus unloaded its last passengers, turned around and drove away, leaving a dusty cloud behind. Erin found herself on the outskirts of the city. The unknown was both frightening and exhilarating, But she didn't want to go back. She couldn't go home either, as they would look for her there first of all. Her gaze fell on a road sign before the exit from the highway. It read, Lakeville. Memory is an amazing thing. Sometimes sounds, images, or conversations that were once accidentally captured and stored in the depths of the human brain resurface. This was one of those moments. Erin immediately recalled a conversation she overheard at the supermarket last year between two elderly ladies. "It's a pity I no longer have the strength for my summer house. Ever since my Paul passed away, I haven't been there in 3 years. And it's such a nice little house with a small plot. Have you been to Lakeville Village? My house is the outermost house with a blue roof and blue shutters. My husband and I specifically painted it this way. To memorialize our honeymoon on Santorini Island." A plan formed on its own to settle in this summer house and stay there until she came of age. Erin took the money out of her pocket and counted it. The plan was immediately supplemented with another item. Finding a job was urgent. After about 15 minutes of walking along the forest road, the needed house came into view as a blue blur. Erin pushed the gate, which creaked and opened welcomingly. The neglect of the tiny plot and the uncared dwelling were striking. The path to the porch was barely visible through the grass, and the dusty sun-bleached shutters were closed and covered with ivy. As a precaution, the girl knocked, but of course there was no answer. The door was locked. After some time, Erin lifted the dirty doormat and discovered a small key underneath it. The room inside smelled of dust and dampness. Without much hope, the girl pressed the switch on the right side of the door, and miraculously, a dim light bulb illuminated the space under the low ceiling. This stroke of luck inspired her to explore further. The old house consisted of 1 bedroom, a living room, and a kitchen. However, everything necessary for a modest existence was there. A bed, a sofa, a table, chairs, and a wood stove in the corner, along with various utensils. In the bedroom there was a dusty bookcase, indicating that the elderly woman and her husband were book lovers. Erin spent the entire day cleaning the house. In the evening, tired but satisfied, the girl sat down on the wooden porch, still feeling the warmth from the sultry day. Now her thoughts began to turn to her family. The image of her brother's longing look and her little sister's tearful face haunted her. Although Erin didn't fully understand how she would be able to reunite her family, she vowed to do everything in her power to return them. The next day, Erin started looking for a job. It was not an easy task. She tirelessly searched through ads in all available sources. Most job openings required a passport. After weighing the pros and cons, Erin decided to offer her services as a caregiver in the free ads section. Surprisingly, the next day her phone rang, and a cheerful female voice said, "Hello, I'm calling about the ad. My name is Brenda. Are you still looking for a caregiver job?" Erin quickly clarified, "Yes, but I live far from the city." To her surprise, the woman responded enthusiastically, "Excellent! And would you be interested in working from home? I have a bedridden husband who has been wanting to go to the village for a while. Of course, I promise fair payment, and I can even pay extra if needed." After a moment of thought, Erin agreed. "Good. Give me the address and I'll come to get acquainted and finalize the remaining details," Brenda said. 3 hours later, a red Jeep pulled up to the gate. Brenda turned out to be a stunning brunette in tight pants and a bright red blouse. Her enhanced black hair, silicone lips, and unnaturally long eyelashes gave her the appearance of someone who had probably spent a lot of time in beauty salons. Erin's plain appearance, lack of makeup, and dark blonde braided hair seemed to meet the young woman's expectations of a caregiver. Brenda, fearful of getting dirty, looked around the modest dwelling with a hint of disgust. "Great. It's just right, she muttered, surprising the future caregiver. Erin's attempts to discuss Brenda's husband's condition and care didn't yield any results. The woman simply grinned and said, "Why worry? You'll get to know each other and discuss everything tomorrow morning." The next day, a specialized car arrived, and 2 strong orderlies carried the disabled man on a stretcher into the house. After placing a small bag with his belongings on the porch, they left without saying a word. The girl was now alone with an unknown man in a strange house. The new tenant was in his 30s, with a scruffy beard and an exhausted expression on his face. His chestnut-coloured hair was unkempt, untouched by a barber's hand for a long time. Sad grey eyes stared indifferently at the ceiling. "My name is Erin." The girl decided to establish a connection immediately and smiled warmly. The man reluctantly turned his head and observed the nurse for a moment. He didn't expect to see such a fragile girl in this role. Erin's long, dark blonde hair was neatly tied back in a ponytail. Her naive blue eyes radiated genuine concern and kindness. "Oh, she's just a girl. How can she help me?" he thought, and he hoarsely introduced himself. "Michael." Erin responded, "Pleasure to meet you. Your wife hired me, but unfortunately she didn't tell me anything about you." Michael grinned bitterly and sarcastically replied, "Not surprisingly, she doesn't know anything about me." Erin tried to imagine what it would be like for a once healthy and strong man to suddenly become helpless and dependent on others. She felt sorry for Michael. She sat down by the bed and asked, "Could you tell me what happened?" Her childlike directness and naivety won him over. No one had shown genuine interest in his well-being for a long time. Suddenly, he felt the urge to share his feelings with someone. Michael had owned a fairly successful construction business for many years. As he focused on growing his business, he never found the time to start a family. However, about 2 years ago, his parents passed away, one after another, and he was overwhelmed by an endless feeling of loneliness. The large house was suddenly abandoned overnight, and Michael had no desire to return to the place where he only encountered the echoing sound of footsteps and the faint rustling of curtains swaying in the draught. However, the dream of a strong and loving family still lingered in his heart. Soon, at a friend's birthday party, he met Brenda, and their passion swept them away in the rhythm of the tango. Despite warnings from acquaintances about Brenda's questionable character, Michael was enthralled by her. Their first meeting quickly led to their wedding. However, after the wedding, the veil of love slowly began to fade. Brenda was not suited for family life. She had no desire for children and preferred spending her time outside the home, away from her husband. Clubs, parties and shopping were the extent of her dreams. After a long day of work, Michael often returned to their lifeless house and warmed up a stale slice of pizza from the nearby pizzeria. And, to his great shame, he couldn't comprehend why he had married Brenda. Their relationship deteriorated, and Michael finally started speaking about divorce. To prevent losing her wealthy lifestyle, Brenda made promises to change herself. For a while, she attempted to be a quiet and domesticated wife. However, Michael sensed her insincerity, and the couple grew further apart. Then, 2 months ago, disaster struck unexpectedly. Michael was robbed and brutally beaten right on the doorstep of his office. Doctors managed to save his life, but the spinal injury left him disabled. His body became almost uncontrollable, and the few movements he could make were extremely difficult and caused excruciating pain. The doctor's prognosis was discouraging. The consequences of the injury would confine him to bed permanently. The attackers were never found. The security cameras were turned off that day, and there were no witnesses. Brenda only visited him at the hospital twice, mostly to discuss the future of the business. The company's employees complained about her interference in Michael's business. Her attempts to take over everything failed, as she lacked expertise in the construction industry. The company survived solely on past projects. With depression taking hold, Michael lost interest in everything. His world had fallen apart. Even upon returning home, things didn't get any easier. Brenda greeted him with a fake smile and tried to convince him to sell the business before it was too late. Furthermore, the young woman practically didn't hide the calls from her lover anymore. Michael felt physically repulsed by being under the same roof as her. He was ready to go anywhere, even to the ends of the earth. When Brenda proposed to move out of town, he agreed immediately. At this point, he no longer cared about anything. He was going there to die. "You'd be better off in nature. A nurse will look after you. As soon as I sell the business, I'll come to you right away. Let's sell the house too. Why do we need a 3-story building now?" Brenda reasoned. Michael remained silent. His disgust for his wife kept him from speaking. When Erin heard his story, she was shocked and wanted to help in any way she could, but she didn't know how. "Would you like me to cook something for you?" was the only thing that came to her mind. Michael smiled kindly for the first time. After his confession about his failed life, he suddenly felt light and free. "I want fried potatoes," he replied. And so they started living together. Erin skillfully took care of her mentee. She cooked, cleaned and washed. The man finally felt strong enough to at least try to improve his condition. He remembered everything the therapists had told him and slowly began to do exercises. Michael didn't want to burden her and made incredible efforts to move around, even though every movement caused unbearable pain. With the support of a cane, he could now take a few steps. Every step was agonizing, but he refused to give up. He didn't want to appear useless and helpless in Erin's eyes. With time, Michael had developed strong feelings for the caring and compassionate young woman, but he didn't know how to navigate these emotions yet. In the evenings, she would light candles, because the small lamp couldn't provide enough illumination, and they would read old books left behind by the elderly owner of the house. They would then engage in long conversations about various topics, and Michael would describe the countries he had visited. When they ran out of things to talk about, they sat together in silence, watching the strange shadows dancing on the walls. A fragile, spiritual connection grew stronger between them each day. The girl admired this intelligent and trustworthy man. One evening, she decided to share her sad story with him. Michael remained silent for a long time, processing the information, before simply saying, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." For some reason, the girl believed him. She realized that she had loved this man for a long time. Two lonely souls with tragic destinies were brought together. Some time later, Brenda arrived again, but this time she was accompanied by a strange woman who seemed to be her opposite. The woman was small in stature, wearing a black business suit and carrying a large leather briefcase. "This is the notary." Brenda casually introduced her to Erin at the gate, and her determined, bloodthirsty gaze revealed her intentions. Seeing Michael in bed, Brenda was taken aback. "Michael, you look good." Her tone couldn't hide her surprise and irritation. "Let's meet Anne Hubbard. She will help us with the document reissuance." "With the document reissuance? What do you mean?" Michael pretended not to understand her intentions. "Darling, we had a deal, remember? We've decided to sell everything while your business is still afloat. Then we'll have money for your further rehabilitation and our decent lives. But we have to hurry. The company's getting worse, and I've already found a buyer for the house. I'm suffering away from you, and I have to do all this work instead of taking care of you. So let's end this burden, and I can finally devote myself to you. And to save you the trouble, we decided it would be better to put it in my name, so I could do it. Honey, you and I have already discussed this, and you agreed to it." I didn't agree to anything, and I'm not going to sign anything over to you." The husband's calm face infuriated the selfish wife. "But Michael, we discussed it, and I've arranged everything. I even brought a notary. You just need to sign." She persistently pressed him. "There will be no deals," the man firmly replied, leaning back on his pillow. The conversation with Brenda had worsened his already severe headache. "But you don't need all this anymore. You'll lie here for the rest of your life. But I'm still young. I still have to live." Brenda said it with anger, unable to control herself. "I've said to you everything I want to say." Michael closed his eyes, hoping Brenda would leave his temporary sanctuary as soon as possible. Brenda looked at the notary, silently pleading, but the notary shook her head. Biting her lip, the wife calmed herself down with visible efforts and tried to justify herself. "Michael, I'm sorry, I was just worried about you. That's why I snapped. Rest, my dear, rest. I'll come back later." And the official delegation left immediately. Before leaving, Brenda approached Erin closely and whispered, "Listen, maybe I forgot to mention when I hired you, but my husband's condition will only worsen. The doctors said nothing would help him. You don't have to try so hard. Just splash some broth in a bowl once a day, and I'll pay you more. A lot more. I hope you understand me properly now." Brenda looked meaningfully into the girl's light-coloured eyes, and then she drove off in her fancy car, leaving behind the lingering scent of her expensive perfume. Erin shuddered at such admonitions, but quickly regained her composure. She wouldn't let Michael worry, especially after such an unexpected visit. The room still carried the heavy scent of Brenda's luxurious perfume. The girl opened the window wide, sat on the chair near the bed, and placed her palm on Michael's forehead. The man opened his eyes, and the headache slowly began to fade. "How fortunate I am to have you, Erin," he whispered tenderly, gently squeezing her narrow palm in his hands. He slowly brought it to his lips and kissed it softly. The girl smiled softly and said, "Let's have some tea." The next day, Erin needed to restock her modest food supplies at a small local store. Next to the shop there was an attractive 2-story house made of white brick and roofed with emerald green tiles. Several cars were parked in front, and there was sometimes a long line of people, some of them using crutches. In a store, Erin asked the saleswoman about that house and its inhabitants. "Ah, it's Bernard's house. He is our witch doctor, our bone setter, a remarkable man," replied the ruddy saleswoman. "Many people seek his help. He cured my brother-in-law's long-standing back pain," she continued while counting out the change. "Is it expensive?" Erin timidly asked. "Oh, not. Bernard never turns anyone away. He has his own principles. He takes as much as a person can give. I heard that one businessman even offered him a car after his son was healed, but he declined such a generous gift." Erin left the grocery store and went to that house. Seizing an unexpected opportunity, she was determined not to let it slip away. A flicker of hope ignited within her, warming her from within. An hour later, the last patient drove away, and Erin confidently pressed the doorbell. Almost immediately, a tall, wiry man in his 60s emerged. He had dark eyes and a hooked nose, and he wore a cotton shirt with loose-fitting, light grey pants that resembled a surgical suit. His strong hands resembled shovels and could probably bend a horseshoe effortlessly. "Hello, are you Bernard?" Erin's voice trembled with excitement. "Yes, I am Bernard," the man replied, his almost black, piercing eyes fixed on her beneath his bushy eyebrows. Erin, trying to be concise and not waste the healer's precious time, said, "I take care of a man. He is 33 years old, with a neck and head injury." Bernard nodded and said, "Bring him tomorrow at 9 o'clock. "We live nearby, on 5th Street, the last house," Erin added with large eyes pleading. The healer nodded. "Okay, I'll drop by in the evening," he said briefly before disappearing into the courtyard. Around 7 o'clock, when the sun had already set behind the summer house, Bernard arrived. He carefully examined the new patient, probing his neck, head, and then moving down the spine to the coccyx. Michael cried out in pain at certain points. Erin sat in the corner, feeling like a sparrow in the cold, her heart aching with every sound of pain. Bernard murmured, "Yes, it's not too late. When was the injury?" 3 months ago, Michael replied. "I see," the healer said, attentively looking into the patient's eyes. He then asked seriously, "Do you want to live?" "Yes, I do," Michael answered with equal seriousness. It seemed that the two men understood each other. "It won't be easy or quick," Bernard stated. He turned to Erin and said, "Go out, girl, take an hour's walk." Obediently, Erin hurried out of the house, but her anxious chest prevented her from enjoying the walk. "Please let it work, Lord," she silently prayed. Erin anxiously waited by the leaning fence until Bernard emerged. He looked exhausted, his shirt soaked in sweat. "I'll come back tomorrow at the same time," he briefly informed her, responding to her unspoken question. He then walked leisurely back to his house. Within 2 weeks of starting treatment, noticeable improvements occurred. Michael's body became more responsive. The pain dulled, and he was able to walk with a stick. Each step and movement tormented him less. Eventually, he was able to descend the porch steps and walk out of the gate. Slowly but surely, he made his way to the healer's sessions on his own. It initially felt like an arduous journey, but Bernard insisted on a consistent effort. Throughout the entire recovery process, Erin never left his side. Encouraged, she ran around the house doing chores each morning, and in the evening there was a long-awaited walk with Michael to Bernard's house. They would return late, holding hands and admiring the nature. Despite feeling tired, they chatted merrily, overwhelmed with happiness. Michael felt confident and started making work calls to stay updated. One day, feeling strong enough, he caught a cab and went to his office. Seeing their long-absent boss, the delighted subordinates surrounded him, eager to shake his hand. "You look wonderful! You're finally back!" The man heard the genuine joy from all sides. Michael entered his office without knocking and saw Brenda sorting through a pile of papers with a stack of folders nearby. "What is it?" she asked, raising her head with a haughty and disgruntled look. But her expression quickly changed to surprise and a crooked smile. "Hello, Brenda." Michael anticipated her reaction and swiftly entered, leaning slightly on his wand. The woman emerged from behind the table, frantically thinking about what to do next. She looked her usual spectacular self, a white blouse with the top 2 buttons undone, a black leather tight skirt, and lacquered stiletto heels. Bright makeup complemented the look. It seemed as though she might stretch out, undo several more buttons, and spin around a pole at any moment. "Michael, what a joy! What a good influence country life has had on you! And it's all thanks to me," she exclaimed, quickly recovering from her surprise and attempting to hug her husband. "Yes, thanks to you," Michael grinned, pulling away from her. "What are you looking for?" "Michael, I'm trying to save our business. I'm sorting it out slowly," she replied, feigning reproach. "Our business?" Michael said sneeringly, going to the table and sitting down in his chair. "You don't have to worry anymore. I'm taking everything into my own hands and freeing you from such a burden." "Oh, Michael, I've been here for several months, day and night, working tirelessly while you're on vacation in nature." She pretended to be indignant and pouted her plump lips resentfully. "I've heard, Brenda, what you have been doing day and night. So, take your things from home, and I'll see you in court. Oh, and I finally met the girl of my dreams. She's the one who saved me." After saying this, Michael breathed a sigh of relief. He had finally said aloud what he had felt for a long time. The sultry brunette turned purple, realizing that she had nothing more to do there. "No, you will not get rid of me so easily," she thought angrily to herself and stormed out, slamming the door loudly. The office staff probably guessed what had happened in the director's office. They murmured approvingly and laughed as she left. This infuriated Brenda even more. Everything didn't go as planned because of this nasty Erin. Brenda couldn't suppress her rage any longer. As she sat in the car, she immediately picked up the phone and dialed the caregiver's number. "Ah, you ungrateful wretch!" she yelled into the receiver instead of greeting. "Who asked you to help him? I've already done almost everything. Persuaded my lover and his friend to attack Michael, and he agreed to sell the business. You stupid stuffed have ruined everything for me." After venting her anger, Brenda faltered, realizing that she had said too much, and hung up. Erin turned off the recording of the conversation and immediately sent it to Michael, as they had agreed. The man had an idea who was to blame for his misfortunes. Knowing his wife's explosive nature, he needed to provoke her to obtain evidence. Then it was a matter of technique: police, investigation, and court. Taking control, the experienced businessman quickly established a workflow. Fortunately, it wasn't too late. He moved his beloved Erin to his mansion and made a marriage proposal. With the help of Michael's connections, they quickly discovered the whereabouts of Erin's younger brother and sister. The journey to the orphanage felt like an eternity, but finally Erin would be reunited with her family. In the hall, Mindy and Cooper anxiously awaited her arrival, accompanied by a teacher. As soon as they saw their beloved sister, the children ran towards her with excitement and hugged her tightly. "Cooper! Mindy!" Erin couldn't contain her emotions any longer, and tears of joy streamed down her face. The younger sister, unable to speak, sobbed uncontrollably too, and even the boy, who had grown in the past 6 months, couldn't hide his teary eyes. Witnessing this heartwarming reunion was impossible to remain indifferent to. The orphanage employee discreetly wiped her own eyes, and Michael smiled with happiness. As Christmas approached, the entire family enthusiastically prepared for the celebration. Michael brought home a huge Christmas tree and, with Cooper's help, set it up in the spacious living room next to the fireplace. Everyone enjoyed in decorating the tree with colourful balls, sparkling icicles, and shining garlands, turning it into a magnificent sight. They brainstormed the menu for the festive table, ordered gifts, laughed, and played around. Amidst these joyful activities, one thought continued to occupy Erin's mind. Where was her youngest brother? What had become of him? Sensing his beloved wife's longing, Michael secretly began gathering information about the child. One day, when he returned from work, he placed the documents on the table without preamble. Erin looked at him in surprise. "His name is Tommy, and he is at the baby home. He hasn't been adopted yet, but there are potential parents being vetted," he informed her. Erin eagerly grabbed the documents and frantically flipped through them, her lips trembling and tears filling her eyes as she read the words on the paper. "Tommy, my dear brother, how I would love to see you." The tenderness for her unknown baby overwhelmed her. She hugged her husband gratefully, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, my dear, for finding some information about him," she exclaimed, but she didn't dare ask the main question. Michael understood without words. "It won't be easy, but I promise you that I will do everything possible and impossible to bring him to us." Erin believed him as she always had. Now she knew exactly what she would wish for in the new year. Erin was awakened from her nostalgic memories. The birds had already had their breakfast and flown away, busy with their bird business. Outside, the children were playing joyfully, revelling in the large snowdrifts and the day off. With her pink cheeks, white jacket, and furry hat with ears, Mindy looked like a cute little animal. Her friend, the French bulldog, also dressed in a small dog coat, excitedly played nearby. Together they were building a huge snow cave. The sound of their happy laughter and the barking of the dog filled the neighbourhood. Meanwhile, the more serious and reserved Cooper skied around the area. Sitting on the railing, the big, important ginger cat observed everything condescendingly, not wanting to join in and get its paws wet. Erin stepped away from the window and leaned over the baby's crib. Tommy was peacefully asleep. He was so small and adorable. He had only recently returned to the family, yet it felt as if he had never left. Suddenly, Erin felt a fluttering sensation in her belly, like a little bird. She knew that another life was developing within her, another precious human being. A sense of tranquility and bliss washed over the young woman. Now that all her loved ones were close, she knew without a doubt that happiness resided in family.